What's up, guys? Coach Madden, YouGoProBaseball.com, here with Brent, Pourciau, Top Velocity, and we're going to talk about today two things in the pitching delivery, hip to shoulder separation and early trunk rotation. Can you talk about what they are, how guys can fix it, and how they can get better at it?
Yeah, so basically this is going to relate to when do you initiate your upper body to throw the ball, basically. So typically when you hit front foot strike, that's the time to start your upper body throwing. I like to break it into two phases. I call the stride phase from lift to front foot strike, and then the throwing phase from front foot strike to pitch release. So we're really talking about that second phase, the throwing phase. When we land, pitchers typically, high velocity pitchers or healthy pitchers typically have more hip to shoulder separation. That means if this is my hips and this is my hip orientation, typically when we land they're open and the shoulders are close. So I have separation specifically from back hip to back shoulder. That's pulled apart and separated, and like I said, studies show high velocity pitchers have a larger, what they call a margin of when their hip speeds peak to when their shoulder speeds peak. So more separation, or what they call separation timing, which gives them time to transfer more energy into their trunk and their arm to go through the arm path, a lot of things happening. When you don't have good hip to shoulder separation, it's not always the case, but a lot of times it's because you're an early trunk rotator. So I always say the opposite of hip to shoulder separation is early trunk rotation, because a late trunk rotation is a better chance you have more hip to shoulder separation. So what's early trunk rotation? When I land, if my shoulders aren't closed and separated and I've already tucked and I'm pulling my chest open, I'm early trunk rotating. So when you land, if your glove is down and you see your chest pushing out, you're an early trunk rotator. And what's going to happen is your arm's going to get forced to grow earlier. And if your arm wasn't up in the arm cock position and going into abduction, then your arm's going to get caught dragging. And studies say it's where typically most of the arm injury comes from, the early trunk rotation. So a lot of people, when I say, hey, you're early trunk rotating because you're tucking that glove as you land, you're doing this. They say, how do I fix it? I say, you got to learn to separate your hips and shoulders, or you got to learn hip to shoulder separation. A lot of people ask me, how do you learn it, or how do you train it? I understand it, coach, but how do I train it? Well, we have these drills with medicine balls, and the reason these medicine balls work, because you throw them with two hands, it forces you to not fly open because you're holding the ball with two hands. Flying open is usually pulling your arms apart. When you hold them together, it doesn't allow you to early trunk rotate. So just in the act of holding a med ball with two hands and throwing makes you stay closed or separated. So, but what we do is we also start them with the back hip open and the shoulder closed, so you're already in separation, and then you drive through that movement and you delay the trunk, you pull the ball back, and then you throw. They're excellent drills, and they're called my separation drills. They're excellent drills to teaching you better hip to shoulder separation.
Awesome. Two things. One thing I tell my guys too, and I think this is a thing that's been coached into some players at an early age, is point the shoulders, or point at your target. And this is getting them very linear with their shoulders, so they're not putting themselves in a good position to get that hip to shoulder separation. So what I tell my guys is to separate at 45 degrees or more closed up. You'll see a lot of major league guys, righties, separating straight at third base almost. Mm-hmm. And that's going to put you in a better position to, when you unwind, that you're going to be able to get better hip to shoulder separation.
I think that's a great point John's making with the shoulder orientation. The thing is if you're in, say, my separation throw and you're inside rotated and you're closing off, say, that 45 degrees, which is a great position to put your upper body, you still need to make sure your hip is engaged and forward. So if you're coming through the pitching delivery and you're in the lateral position and you're doing this, you're separating. You just need to make sure that hip gets through and gets open to drive your back shoulder. And that's the key here. I always tell guys, really what we're trying to do is we're trying to pull this back shoulder around to launch our arm. There's two ways we can do that. We can do that by driving ahead the back hip from the back shoulder, and it stretches and then pulls it along. Or if I don't drive my back hip, then I typically have to go here to pull my back shoulder around. And what do you think this is if I do this early? Early trunk rotation. So there's really only, to me, one way of doing this, ground up, and it's driving the back hip ahead of the back shoulder to then carry all the energy forward, as opposed to the glove side trying to take over and do it. And that's why I tell guys, be careful with scap loading. because scap loading can pull it apart, right, and make it drag. Scap loading works as long as it's separated. As long as we're separating, we can scap load. But if we're not separating and we're doing this, then we're early trunk rotating, dragging our arm, and we're going to have problems.
The second point that I wanted to make before that I forgot was when looking at this, when trying to identify this, at least one way that I like to look at it is from the front angle and look at when the player's front knee stops moving, whether it be out this way or forward, and then see where they are behind their body. If they're in a good spot, you're going to see it behind their head, right? If they're here, obviously in front of their head or straight behind, not enough hip to shoulder separation. How do you?
Yeah, that's a good point. I always tell guys, you rarely play catch with a hard thrower and you see the ball here the whole time. I don't think that ever happens. Every time you play catch with a hard thrower, it's like this, right? It's here and then they go. So I think that's very important. It's just don't forget how your hips work with that. Your hips have to be driving as you get into that closed shoulder orientation.
And one other point that I want to leave you guys with is sometimes we get too mechanical as pitchers, and actually a lot of times we do.
Yeah.
And one thing I want you to think of too is just as a little kid, like if I were to tell you to rear back and throw a ball, what would you do? You would lean back a little bit and you would cock back this way.
Right.
That's how you put yourself in a good position for hip to shoulder separation. You rear back. If you're trying to throw faster and hip to shoulder separation is going to help you throw faster, just rear back. Don't overthink it. I know we're working on things. We're trying to improve our mechanics, but try to be an athlete on the mound.
I say the same thing. Like you're punching a guy. I relate it to punching. You're going to punch the guy chest open like this. What are you going to do? You're going to go boom, right? So same thing. I think of it, I'll tell you right now, when you take pitching mechanics into another context with the same physics, it just makes sense. Like I get all these guys in here, I'm teaching them how to drive through their back hip and delay their trunk because they all want to put their front side down so early. I said, well, what if you were a hitter doing the same thing? And then their eye goes, oh, for some reason it makes more sense with hitting than when you show them how it works with pitching or with boxing. It's the same thing. Sometimes you got to take it into another skill and take it out of context and see it in a different perspective.
It's funny how similar they are when you break it down. So that's one great part of, well, two great parts. We talked about early trunk rotation as well. But we made a video with 4 tips to instantly increase your pitching velocity. Really good stuff. It's kind of the big ideas around Brent's program that if you're a pitcher and you want to increase your pitching velocity, you definitely want to check it out. Click the first link in the description below. It's going to take you to a page where you enter your first name and your email, and then we'll send you over that video. If you watch it and you implement this stuff, you're going to see some results and some really good stuff. So definitely check that one out. Great stuff. Thank you.
Thank you.